Hello there, thank you for staying with us and welcome to another edition of Channels Beam. I'm Victor Matthias. Now, mixed reactions still trail the release of a draft code of practice by the National Information Technology Development Agency, NITDA, last week. Now, while some welcomed the development, others have termed it another attempt by the government to regulate free speech vis-a-vis social media. NITDA, however, says it created the code in collaboration with stakeholders such as the Nigerian Communications Commission, the National Broadcasting Commission, along with contributions from tech giants Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, Google, as well as TikTok. Now, we will take a deep dive into the document today on the show to see whether or not it is to the benefit of Nigerians. But before we get into that, let's take a look at what made the social media trends in the past week.
It was a mixed Father's Day celebrations for Nigerians as some celebrated wholeheartedly, showering encomiums, sharing lovely pictures of their dads, as they gave reasons why their dads are the best in the world. Some were thrown into mourning as gunmen attacked two churches in Kaduna State and killed 3 worshippers, injuring 2 and leaving several others missing. The worship centers that came under attack are St. Moses Catholic Church and Maranatha Baptist Church, both in Kajuru local government area of the state. Candidate of the All Progressives Congress, Mr. Abiodun Yebanji, has emerged victorious in the Ekiti governorship election after polling 187,057 votes to defeat his closest rivals from the People's Democratic Party and Social Democratic Party. Congratulatory messages have since been pouring in since INEC declared him winner in the early hours of Sunday.
Well, there you go. Those were some of the trends in the past week. But joining us to look at this document is the head legal and board matters at NITDA, Mr. Emmanuel Edet. He joins us via Zoom from Abuja. It's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
Of course. We also have joining us via Zoom as well, Khadija El Usman. She's the lead for Anglophone West Africa at Paradigm Initiative. She has a focus to advance internet freedom and monitor the legal and policy framework around the region to ensure that citizens' rights are protected online. It's a pleasure to have you as well on the program, Khadija.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Ms. Edet kicks out this conversation for us. Some have said that this draft code of practice, came about as a result of the fallout, from the ban on Twitter and the resultant, communication, between the government and Twitter itself. But if that isn't the case, tell us what informed the decision, to draft this code of practice.
Thank you very much for the question. The truth is that is part of the factors that contributed to having this code of practice, but it wasn't the singular factor that raised this particular issue. For a long time, we've been hovering around the fact that there's a need for us to increase to some extent the type of safety that we can have online here in Nigeria specifically, and ensure that misinformation and disinformation is adequately addressed in the online environment, as well as content that may not comply with the laws and regulations of Nigeria. And so it's a mixed bag of things, but the major reason why we came up with this code of practice is to ensure that the online space is adequately safe for users, and also to ensure that freedom of expression is matched with the legitimate use and responsible use of these spaces online.
Yeah, so some would argue that, we already have some laws, guiding Nigerians, the practice and the use of social media and other social media platforms, of course, that are there, maybe the Cybercrime Act and all of those laws that are there. What is this draft code of practice going to be doing differently?
What is different about this draft code of practice is that it basically deals with procedure of putting up content in the online environment. It hardly criminalizes any act or activity by any user in the online environment, but rather we want to collaborate with these platform operators to ensure that content that are inimical to the safe use of the internet in Nigeria are addressed adequately based on existing laws. So it actually writes on existing laws and then develops procedure for addressing contents that are not safe for Nigerians here in Nigeria.
All right, let me hold you there for a bit. Let me just quickly hear from Khadija. Khadija, speaking of the contents of the draft code, what would you say caught your attention the most after going through this draft code?
Honestly, there were a lot of issues that caught my attention, but if we would say what caught my attention the most, it would be somewhere in part 2 that provided that so earlier in the code, it provides that where content is flagged as being illegal or harmful, it should be taken off in 24 hours. And then later, in part 2 thereabout, it mentions that even when such data has been taken off, it should be stored by the platform that owns it, for access by NITDA on a later date. It basically asks that, the code asks that data of individuals should be stored even after it has been removed, deleted, and I cannot remember the other word, but that definitely flags some concerns, especially as regarding data protection, considering that we don't have a data protection law. But, the questions are, how long are these platforms supposed to hold this data? What happened to the right to be forgotten that individuals hold where, it contravenes the right to the privacy of any individual. So imagine we're talking about situations where someone posts something illicit or illegal about another person to blackmail them. They manage to get it deleted. NITDA wants to hold that information. So that definitely flagged some concerns for civil society and individuals as well.
So in all of this, because I just made mention of some of the laws that we have currently, and I'm thinking, how potent are the laws that we have currently, and to what extent have they been put to test?
I would not call them potent at all. We definitely do have gaps. We still have gaps, although the Cybercrimes Act exists and regulations like the NDPR exist, there are still gaps. For instance, the NDPR has been in existence since 2019, but we cannot say that the number of fines that have been put out correspond with how much data impunity actually happens in the country. So I cannot say for a fact that they have been enough. What we do need is comprehensive legislation that has the buy-in of the people. So another concern that this code of practice has is that it does not have the statutory mandate. One thing that legislation does for us is that it gives what democracy sells itself on, that most of the people would have said yes to a particular law. And we can also see that the NDPR is limited in scope, in who or what can be prosecuted. They only have the mandate of fines, not necessarily more serious punitive measures, which might be needed in these instances. So there are gaps, and what we need are not necessarily regulations and codes of practices that come into, like cement to patch up cracks, but full-on legislation that address these issues, full-on legislation that have the buy-in of the people based on democratic instances. So even though NITDA said they consulted with most of these platforms, how many people, individuals who this code of practice would be enforced upon contributed to it?
So let me just quickly track back to Mr. Edet, talking about the number of people that were consulted while the draft was being made. Like I said in my intro, I made mention of the NDC, the NCC, the tech giants. I was wondering if there was any local stakeholder or local company that was consulted, even though I understand that as it is now, it's a draft and there is an email where people are being told to send their contributions. So let me just ask this now, Mr. Edet. How many contributions have been sent, since the draft was released to the public?
numbers, but I know we've received quite a bit of contributions. We've had the opportunity of engaging like this with groups of people. We've been on several fora and had discussions with citizens on the approach we should take. And we've had very constructive responses, and people have identified certain areas that we need to work on and certain areas that they are not comfortable with. But this is the essence of democracy, and that's why we are here. We ought to understand that legislation sometimes does not come as quickly as we expect it to come. So what do we do in the interim sometimes? And we should also note that the fact that this does not come from the National Assembly does not mean it is ineffective. By the Interpretation Act and by our law in Section 6, we have the capacity to develop subsidiary legislation. And that's exactly what we're doing. So the national policies that we have in this country has actually identified certain areas we need to do in order to develop the digital economy. We have identified this as one of those areas. And we are giving an opportunity to everyone. We've engaged with social media platforms. We've engaged with some civil society organizations. A lot of them were invited. Some showed up, some didn't. But we are still engaging. The door is still open. We want to know. We need to protect people online. There are some images that actually go online that are unbelievable. And so we want to develop a procedure to ensure that these images do not propagate in any manner to make it unsafe for people and make people lose trust and confidence in the use of this platform. That's just the objective, and we are using existing laws to deal with these issues by creating this regulation.
All right, so let me just take out an excerpt, from the draft, which talks about what most of these companies will be doing. For example, platforms whose users are more than 100,000 users. So they shall, they are expected to have be incorporated in Nigeria, have a physical contact address, details of which shall be made available on their website or their platform. Appoint a liaison officer who shall serve as a communication channel between government, and quite about 6 of them in that particular. So now the question is, like you said earlier on, this the Twitter issue is one, out of many that, reasons that has brought us where we are now. So has Twitter, have they done the things that the federal government, NITDA of course inclusive, asked them to do before they were brought back online in Nigeria?
The simple answer is yes. And for those that have not been fulfilled yet, we're still working on them together with Twitter. So that's on the Twitter side. But we also have to recognize that even the definition of social media itself, it's a bit cumbersome. We have blogs that still have the same effect as social media, being controlled by single individuals. And citizen journalism is another issue that we have to deal with. Some of those contents do not actually follow proper codes or follow proper ethics of transmitting this type of information. So yes, we want as much as possible to be able to reach these platforms and ask that some of this misinformation and disinformation should be addressed as quickly as possible. That's the essence of those types of provisions in the code.
All right, so let me again track back to one of the concerns that Khadija mentioned, about data privacy. I mean, how are we going about that, looking at the fact that NITDA is asking these social media platforms to retain the content of people that maybe they're asked to delete a content, and they're still asking them to keep the content for later or for reference in the future. I mean, how do we bridge that gap, looking at, that someone's privacy or data might be ruptured at that point in time?
All right, thank you very much for that question. And just for clarification, the essence of retention normally is a standard practice anywhere in the world, because when you are actually carrying out investigations, you need evidence, you need proof. So what if some of those postings actually end up as a criminal offense based on Nigerian law? Do we just say, okay, because we have removed that content, the person who committed the crime will be let to go free? I don't think that's going to be a good way to go. So there are rules governing the retention of this content. And those rules are expressly stated in the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation. And for information, Nigeria is currently working on a full data protection law because we know that's a basic requirement to do business, and in the international community, it provides confidence and trust. So whatever retention of data anywhere in this country or that affects Nigerians is protected by data protection rules and regulations, and it cannot be misused. And so the whole essence is to have something to work with where there is a criminal prosecution, and also to make reference where there is a need to provide reports on the activities of these platforms in Nigeria.
All right, then let me hold you both for a bit. We'll have to take a break. And of course, when we come back, I will look at other perspectives on how this is going. That's in a moment. Please stay with us. Well, thank you for staying with us. If you've just joined us, you're watching Channels Beam on Channels Television, and we're looking at the recently released draft code of practice by the Nigerian Information Technology Development Agency. And of course, we have with us Emmanuel NITDA joining us from Abuja, as well as Khadija El Usman, also joining us via Zoom from Abuja. Khadija, let me get you to kickstart the second half of the conversation for us. Looking at what is obtainable in best global practices, how would you put this, or how would you say this is in line with what is obtainable globally?
So first off, globally, you don't put the cat before the horse, or however that goes. The law should exist before you ask people for their trust and to give information and such and such. So it looks like we're walking backwards. But another thing that is of concern is that there's no oversight provided in the code of practice. And Nigeria operates what we call a checks and balances system, separation of powers. There's nowhere that tries to ensure that the agency does not abuse the power that it is given. So when you say that information should be taken off, information should be stored, who is there regulating how it is used, how it is stored, how long it is there for, and things like that? There's no mention of the role of the courts, the role of the people in there. There's no oversight provided in the code of practice. And that is a thing of concern. It also provides that reports should be made. I think it was a yearly or quarterly, something like that, a general report, really, of how many people are using their platforms at a particular time, how many people have left, how many people have deleted their accounts. And those reports should be made directly to NITDA. The question is, why isn't that report made public? That is something that is a global practice. You'd find even companies like MTN making transparency reports. If we're talking about accountability and trust, why aren't these reports supposed to be made public? I also find the code to be a bit contradictory. You'd find that part 1 says remove content in 24 hours, but part 2 also says they need to ensure that they make verifications and things like that. Is that a realistic timeline? I mean, even within our own context, you find that the FOI Act allows for about 7 days. So is that realistic?
Well, that's a question perhaps Mr. Eric can answer for us.
All right, thank you very much, Khadija. I think if you read the code very well, you'll see that a lot of the requests will be based on court order, especially the 24-hour takedown is totally based on court order. Also, there is nothing that actually prevents these platforms from making these reports public. We just make it a requirement to send a report to us. And if you want this report from us, you can actually request based on freedom of information. So there's nothing hidden. There's nothing cloak and dagger about this. What we are trying to do here again, and I want to re-emphasize, is that we are just trying to ensure that as far as Nigeria is concerned, the use of these platforms are not abused. That's all. I mean, if you find a picture of your loved one that has been murdered online, because we have received this report, and you expect it to be there for the next 7 days, the next 12 days before you take it down, that is not something that I think would be nice for anyone. So the point here is that we are trying to make sure as much as possible that in cooperation with these platforms, we ensure that whatever goes up complies with Nigerian law. We ensure that whatever procedure is put in place actually meets the requirement of Nigerian law as enshrined in the Constitution and every other law of the land. And to also ensure that people actually make contributions. If people are not satisfied with certain sections of this particular code, this is an opportunity for us to have this feedback, plug this feedback into the code, and ensure that it adequately addresses the concerns of Nigeria. There are different spectrum of issues that have come up as a result of this code. So we, as a stakeholder responsible organization, we are not averse to having these conversations because it makes the codes better. It helps people understand us better. So we have the court overlooking us. We cannot do anything that's outside the law, which covers us or which provides and gives us the mandate. And if people are dissatisfied with what we have, they have a right to claim their rights in court. So there are those checks and balances. We cannot operate like a lawless organization in a lawful country like Nigeria. So these issues can and will be addressed using the instrumentality of the law. Thank you.
So how long do people have? How long do people have to send, their contributions?
At the moment, we have given 14 days, but if there's a need to extend it, we will surely extend it because we are listening.
All right, very well. Then I have to say thank you to you, Emmanuel Edet, for joining us on the program today. You're head legal and board matters at NITDA. Khadija El-Usman as well. Thank you to you as well for joining us. I hope you would use the time available, to sending your concerns as well to NITDA so that they can include it when the code will be made a proper document and it doesn't remain a draft. Thank you as well to you for joining us today on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. Well, that's where we are. We'll take a look at the movie videos on our YouTube channel in the past week.
This week's most viewed videos kicks off with the arrest of persons engaged in vote buying during the just concluded Ekiti election.
In the envelope, look at it. Look at it. Look at it.
It is followed in fourth by that of a tanker driver who drove a flaming tanker away from residents at the risk of his life. Third spot is taken by the video of a politician who believes there won't be a merger between Peter Obi and Rabiu Kwakwanso ahead of the 2023 elections.
Peter Obi wouldn't want to collaborate with anybody because the youths follow him. They are very resilient, and it's like, you call it a movement, it's really a movement. And so those youths are going to stay true. If he disappoints them, then he will have paid his political, he will have buried his political aspiration for life.
In second is the moment the APC presidential candidate went back to exchange pleasantries with Vice President Yemi Osinbajo after skipping. While topping the charts is Senator Dino Melaye, maintaining that the PDP presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar will best his APC counterpart come 2023.
And Atiku will defeat fourth, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, even up to the 10th force. Atiku Abubakar is the man to salvage us from these economic cankerworms and financial scavengers.
And that's it on the show. Thank you so very much for watching. Thank you. I'm Victor Matthias. Bye for now.
Political atmosphere.